Hey, welcome. In this video, we will use a GRIEFS texture repair to create this pixelated look in this cozy kitchen. We're using this free model from Bubble Tea on Sketchfab. The artist is providing also a Blender file, which we will be using during the tutorial. My name is Gabe. Let's get started. We can start with a new project and jump back to the Blender to take a screenshot of the scene. I need to mention here that for this tutorial, I have stripped the scene of the previous materials so we can start from scratch. We can paste the screenshot into the project so we can keep track of what materials we will need. Looking at the scene, we will need a couple of reference images. We definitely need a wooden texture for the shelf, chairs, and the kitchen table, maybe some punchy color for the fridge, also brushed metal textures that could be shared across multiple meshes, like this oven and the handles. And we also need a couple of images for the flowers, a floor tile, and possibly more variations of dimension types for smaller props. In this tutorial, we are using the images from Unsplash under free license. So let's start with some wood textures. We'll use this for the kitchen table, chairs, and shelves. So it's good to look maybe for some more variations though. We basically repeat this process of collecting enough reference images so we can then start creating the regions that we need for our materials. Texture Repair is able to handle thousands of images, so don't be afraid getting as much reference as you need. Once we have reference in the canvas, we can start creating the regions. And in here, I am setting a 1:1 aspect ratio, so we have this square-like texture in the 2D preview. And then I am also setting the preview resolution to 128 pixels. This is automatically then forcing the viewport to display the image in the nearest neighbor interpolation, so we have this crispy pixelated look. So then I'm creating more regions here, so we have more textures that we can directly sample from. But this is a good example of how some textures might look good in high resolution, but in low res they look very noisy. And this is called a moire effect. This appears when two similar closely spaced patterns are overlapping with each other. So in the end, I have decided not to use this image, and I ended up using the previous wooden image for almost everything. But when something like that happens, it's really good to have some more variations to sample from. In here, I'm creating a manual crop region by pressing C for more control, so I can draw the shape exactly how I need it, because we will use these crops for cacti models that we have on top of the kitchen counter. And this is also a good time to save your project already, so if anything happens, you won't lose your progress. But I'm used to be pressing Control S automatically, that sometimes I forget that there is also an autosave feature, but you can tweak the interval of the autosave in the settings if you'd like. So then I'm creating a couple of regions that would be mainly used for the cup on the table and flower pots, and since this process is the same for other images, I am going to speed this up. This would be our floor tile, and since this is a very nice repeated pattern, we can crop this manually, and then in the 2D preview, we can switch to seam offset. This basically shifts the edges to the center, and it's easier to see where the seams are, and it's very useful when you need to align the edges together. But since this is a low texture, the seams are almost, if not invisible. You can also toggle the 3x3 tiling if you'd like to see it in a bigger picture, but I think this is good enough. So once we have all the textures we need, we can check the Atlas Preview tab, which puts these textures into a one big Atlas texture that we will then export and use in Blender for our texturing. If we would switch the preview resolution, the Atlas recomputes with that selected size, so it's non-destructive and you can be switching between in runtime. Notice that we did not use the 3D preview today at all, but all of our regions have the PBR textures automatically generated. We will visit the 3D preview and proper PBR map generation in another tutorial, but you can definitely play around. For this tutorial, we will not need PBR maps, but I will show you later one material where we will be using its normal map and import it into Blender. Since we have everything we need for now, let's jump to exporting. We have a couple options how to export these maps, but we will focus now mainly on the Atlas export, since we will use this in Blender. We can generate PBR maps, but let's wait a bit. Let's just make sure right now that we check the retro textures to true, and we set our final texture size, which is 128 pixels for this case. We can choose also the image format. I am choosing PNG here, and naming convention can be default as well, since we have just one texture. Let's export this. On default, Texture Ripper is exporting into Pictures folder under Texture Ripper/export/project name. Here's our atlas. Now we can finally go into Blender and start texturing. With our scene opened in Blender, let's make sure that we are in the shading layout, and in the material properties panel, let's create a new material. I am starting here with the table. Let's import the atlas into the material graph and connect the color with the base color in the principal BSDF. Since our table does not have correct UVs for this texture, we need to unwrap the UVs by selecting the table in the edit mode, and then by pressing U, we do cube projection. Don't forget to set the interpolation from flat to nearest in the image node. I have done that later, but it's important to do this so we have this pixelated look that we were going for. In here, I am just moving the UVs to the wooden texture in the atlas, and we have a table having a material resembling a wood. Please take this UV editing with a grain of salt. I am sure a lot of you know how to do this marginally better than me. But since this process is the same for everything in the scene, I will speed this up again. While this is running in the background, I want to say that in this scene we are using just one texture for everything. And this can be good for saving a lot of VRAM usage in games, for example, but also it is not entirely useful for photorealistic texturing when you need a lot of detail. I am sure a lot of artists would like to have a separate texture sets for some meshes, and the process is basically the same. You would export the textures you need separately. Some of them can be in Atlas, some of them can be separate with PBR maps, and so on. And with Texture Ripper, you got all of this power in your hands. Don't forget that you can join our Discord server and share your work with us there. We would be very thankful seeing what everyone is working on, and since we are just starting a community, your contribution would be immensely appreciated. If you have any questions, features you would like to see, or potentially have technical issues with Texture Ripper, please let us know. So as promised, here is the example of using a normal map from Texture Ripper. I cropped the label from the milk, and then I used the clone stamp tool to remove the name, just showing the possibilities what you can do with Texture Ripper. This can be used for fixing artifacts or just removing unwanted detail in the texture. Once I was done with the albedo map, I proceeded with fixing the normal map. Since normal map, height map, and ambient occlusion are all height maps, they share the same clone stamp. So whatever painting change I do on one of those three, it will reflect in the other two. In here, I am just adding a multiply node between the normal map connection. This fixes the normal map and it all displays correctly then. And this sums up the tutorial on how to create pixel art textures and applying them onto low poly interior. The Steam and the web versions of GRIEFS Texture Ripper are live and available. Thank you so much for supporting GRIEFS, and if you want to see any other tutorials, let us know in the comments. Thank you.